that. Really thrilled now to say, hey, we're going to be having Major General Olson join us. John Olson has joined us in the past. He's always been incredibly insightful and interesting. He's been doing some very important work. I should say Dr. Major General Olson. And we're also thrilled to have Daniel Gizinski, the Chief Strategy Officer for Comtech, doing this interview with him. So we're going to turn it over to them.
All right. Thank you, David. Appreciate the opportunity to be here as part of this America's Future Series event. We're honored to have with us today Major General John Olson. General Olson is the Mobilization Assistant to the Chief of Space Operations and Space Force Lead for CJAD-C2 and ABMS. He's got quite an impressive resume, both in uniform, as well as serving for nearly a decade in leadership roles in industry, including as President, CEO, and GM for several public and private companies. He also spent a decade supporting NASA in the White House as a senior executive, and recently as the first Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer for the Department of the Air Force. Sir, thank you for joining us for this event.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be with you.
To start today, let's take a step back. In your view, what are some of the most important aspects of joint force integration? And what are some of the ways that this integration will help ensure that the U.S. and our allies maintain a strategic advantage in an age of technology-driven deterrence and defense?
Well, you know, joint force integration is absolutely critical to everything that we do. By its very name, integrating the joint force, and I would even extend further to the coalition and allied elements of that joint force is fundamental to success in integrated deterrence and defense of the United States and our partners and allies around the globe. And so, you know, as we look at that, it is so core, and that starts with our planning and our strategy. It starts with our acquisition and our development through integrated tests. Those elements are all essential to yield warfighting capabilities, integrated deterrence capabilities that are capable, credible, and we're competent in execution. So these are really the core of the entire joint warfighting concept, or JWC. And you know, as we look at that, it is ever more important in this age of data-driven technology and innovation that the rate and pace is so brisk that we must remain in all these sectors and domains tightly integrated, partnered with the best and brightest across industry, academia, and the interagency and the international communities, and then driving that in a cohesive, action-oriented, outcomes-oriented approach. It's making sure the say-do ratio, the applications, the outcomes are commensurate with the rate of need. So we like to say delivering at the speed of need and relevance.
It's a great answer. When we look at the efforts over the last few years, obviously, you know, quite a lot of time being spent driving towards this CJAD-C2 vision. What do you see as some of the biggest wins over the last couple of years?
Well, you know, I'll first start with a macro answer, and then I'll give you a specific drill down, you know, from my knothole as the Space Force lead for CJAD-C2 and ABMS and C3BM. Largely, when we look at it, I think we already know the ability to sense, make sense, and act across all the services in our coalition partners and allies in an adversarial environment at the speed of relevance, which is the very definition of CJAD-C2. That definition, every part of that matters. But when we get right down to it, it's a huge systems integration effort. It's an incredibly complex undertaking. We have all these disparate systems, from legacy to a brand new cutting edge, all of the emerging and evolving threats. When we look at that, I think we have developed, stemming from the joint warfighting concept through CJAD-C2, we started to refine the architecture. You know, we've got a JAD-C2 reference architecture 3.0, a design reference, or a reference design 2.0. These things are starting to take the ethereal and drive to a specific, but most importantly, the real magic, the real progress in CJAD-C2 over the past couple of years is the actual transition into tangible impacts, transitional programs that take that concept, take that strategy, and put it into practice. But more important, on top of that, and certainly each of the services with the Department of the Air Force, it's the Advanced Battle Management System, or ABMS. We really have evolved that. That is driving the operational requirements. But now we have the Department of the Air Force is building the DAF Battle Network. And that battle network is led by an acquisition effort that's through the Integrating Program Executive Officer, who is Brigadier General Luke Cropsey, and he is assisted in the architecture and systems engineering side by Dr. Brian Tipton. So we have the operations side, which to date it's been Brigadier General Jeff Valencia and I. It'll now be transitioning to Brigadier General Flack Clayton. The two of us will drive the operations side of the requirements, and General Cropsey and Dr. Tipton will be driving that acquisition side. But the point there is we're marrying the operations requirements and the acquisition in the Department of the Air Force, and we're driving smart, prioritized, very focused systems of system solutions that work on a time scale that meets our needs. Now, that's what we're doing in the Department of the Air Force. In the Department of the Navy, they're doing some incredible work in the overmatch arena, and then Army Project Convergence has made incredible strides. You know, as we look at PC 21, Project Convergence 21, and then 22, they've had significant improvements in the overall relevance and mission outcomes. The lessons learned rate and pace has been great. But I'd say the singularly most important thing is we've started to converge at the military department component level, so that I can confidently say between the Department of the Air Force and the Department of the Navy, we've never had as good of a level of cross communication and as good of a level of integration and interoperability and communication writ large on all echelons as we have now. I think we're building on that and we're expanding on it. So that's really what's happened in the past couple of years. I think it's been slow to mature, but it's starting to pick up at a rate and pace that's really measurable and exciting. As we talk about from a Space Force specific perspective on this, we've certainly already started with our resilient and effective space architecture. The Space Development Agency just this past 28 February awarded a $1.8 billion contract to Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and York Space Systems for 126 satellites. This is our global communications network in LEO. So we call this proliferated low Earth orbit PLEO infrastructure. We're looking at the Unified Data Library as our primary repository for our space domain awareness, or SDA data. As we expand this, it's a secure cloud-based multi-classification environment. This is exactly what we need to be having, command or combined CJAD-C2, combined joint all-domain command and control at the speed of need, where we can add machine-to-machine relevance. Likewise, we've been also leveraging, enhancing Scoop with this is Space C2 open architecture operational prototype. The follow-on system to Scoop is in place and amping up. These are just a couple of examples of how we're driving a data-centric, data-driven culture within the Space Force and evolving to a modern paradigm where space is a congested domain, and we're trying to deliver the capabilities that will bring integrated deterrence across, not just for the in-space contested space fight, but across and supporting the coalition, the allies, and the joint service across all those multi-domain elements. And I think as we look at that, the future of modern deterrence, defense, and combat is absolutely dependent upon space in every facet. And so as the lead for space requirements in the entire Department of Defense, as outlined by the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, we're taking that mission seriously, but it's also an active one of integration and listening and responsive reflection of those joint service and coalition needs across the board. So it's, I know that's a long-winded answer, but it's really an important one, because I think all too often, this CJAD C2 is the everything system, and our track record hasn't been so good in those across not just the Department of Defense, but as a government. And I think when we break it down, we take a stepwise systems engineering disciplined approach. That's going to lead to success, and we're on that path.
Thank you. That's a great answer, and it's inspiring to hear all of the progress being made and laid out there. Certainly quite a number of accomplishments, and it's been really amazing to see some agencies move quite a bit faster than they were able to in the past. And I think it's a meaningful part of that. So definitely appreciated. In a recent briefing that you gave to the New York Foreign Press Center, you mentioned the 3 lines of effort as it relates to the Chief of Space Operations. I really glommed onto the third. It's interesting, partnering to win. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean when you talk about partnering to win, and maybe expand a little bit on what it takes to get there for our audience today?
Well, yes, I too love it, and I think the Chief of Space Operations, when he laid out those 3 lines of effort, the third and definitely last but not least one is indeed partnering to win, and that means doing so in an enlightened, interactive way across all the elements that could possibly comprise. Certainly, first and foremost, that involves partnering with industry and leveraging industry, and not doing so in a directive way, but in enlightened, interactive fashion that does so to harness the true innovation and entrepreneurial capacity of our industrial base, which I think has been a world-class differentiator forever. But it also builds on capturing the diversity, the richness of the diverse thought and processes and perspectives and philosophies that come in from a rich and dynamic and vibrant ecosystem on the industrial sector. But it also means partnering internationally. It means partnering with our allies and coalition members and like-minded countries around the world. We've seen the Ukraine conflict has shown again how intrinsically and fundamentally important great partnerships is in providing integrated deterrence and defense that matters and that is constructive. It's also about partnering with academia. As we look at the rate and pace of technology and innovation, that rich ecosystem in academia has bred the great ideas and inventions that have powered us throughout our history. And so I think we need to continue to harness that. And frankly, it's a very competitive geopolitical, geostrategic environment. We need to absolutely positively harness our greatest minds and do so in a conversion rate, much like whether that's industry or academia. We need to apply those practical principles and leverage them into outcomes in our integrated deterrence and defense strategies on the national security side. And I think that ties to the broader fact that our economic security, our health security, and our national security are fundamentally and intrinsically intertwined. And so you've got to have this whole of nation, this whole of government approach, and that's what it really means to partner to win. And as we look at that, we've been doing a lot of specific activities. We've got our space, our commercial space office, or COSMIC. We just stood up our Chantilly office of that. We've got lots of work going on with DIU Space, and as they expand their mission set and broader portfolio, and now reporting to the Secretary of Defense, I think that's going to be great. We got the Air Force Research Laboratory, very focused on our activities. We've got AFWorks and SpaceWorks, focused on very relevant tech elements. So these are just some of the myriad and prolific elements that we're trying to do to harness these broad partnership benefits. Yet we've had a lot of reverse industry days, some on AI and the incredible potential that can be applied to space there. That was the most recent one. So I think you're starting to see that, one, we're listening, we're active listeners. Two, we want to be smart partners. And three, we're absolutely vigorously engaged in this. So it's an exciting time. I would be so bold and audacious to say that I think in the next 5 years, we will see a greater rate of pace and change and outcomes in terms of our Space Force and in terms of our national security writ large and our integrated deterrence than we have in the last 50. And that's going to be mind-blowingly fast. And this partnering to win is what it's going to allow us to do to get there and to succeed, because it is a first mover advantage. There is absolutely a huge difference between first and second place, and there's only one place for the United States and our partners and allies to be in this endeavor.
That's a great answer, and it's inspiring to hear. Along those lines, we saw the schedule shows that the SWAC should be completing the space data transport force design later this year. And I think an important part of that is, the role that commercial companies play in this new hybrid military and commercial architecture. There's obviously a unique set of challenges that come with trying to put together a solution along those lines. Can you talk a little bit about, how you're thinking about what commercial companies can bring to bear in that approach?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that question. The Space Warfighting Analysis Center is our force design entity, and what they're doing is they're simply using a model-based systems engineering approach, which is threat informed, and it is taking a very objective, analytical, digital approach, one that's end-to-end, to allow us to leverage the fact that we're the first service born digital, the fact that we're leveraging a digital headquarters, a digital workforce, a digital engineering ecosystem, and digital operations. Those four pillars of our digital service, they're actually bringing it to fruition by allowing us to make and interact with, we just talked about partnering to win. It allows us to interact with all those partners, including our internal elements, in a way that's faster and more dynamic and responsive than ever. But why are we doing that? It's really to drive the fact that we need to have a safe, stable, and secure environment in space. We don't have that. It's congested, it's competitive. It is a warfighting domain, and that has been driven so around the world by not just one, but several of our competitors and potential adversaries. And so we're trying to drive all the tools into a responsive ecosystem, and we're in terms of our new force design, we're getting after a resilient and effective space order of battle, or a resilient and effective space force, space architecture capacity. And as we mentioned, a hybrid space architecture is a fundamental element of that. Proliferated constellations in low Earth orbit, multi-orbitology, different sensor systems, ones that leverage a much shorter, if we look at the acquisition principles outlined by Honorable Frank Calvelli and our space or our SAF-SQ, our space acquisition entity, our service acquisition executive, they're driving much shorter timelines, 2 to 3 years, much simpler systems that can leverage the rapid tech refresh rates, that can leverage the ability to get things on orbit that are solutions oriented much more quickly than we ever have been. We're doing that with missile warning, missile track. We're doing that with space data transport. We're doing that with all the key elements that stitch together the joint services, as well as our coalition partners and allies. And when the tyranny of distance in the Indo-PACOM theater or across this global context present challenges, it's this hybrid space architecture, it's this proliferated resilient space architecture that's going to be the solution there. But it's not just one thing. As we look at the cat and mouse game of one action and the counter action, we are constantly trying to use this model-based systems engineering approach to stay 1 or 2 steps ahead, maybe 3 steps ahead of the next level of thinking, and drive that into being at the speed of relevance. And so that's how we're getting after joint lethality and effectiveness in all those. But that's also very tied to an integrated test portfolio. We want to take things, bridge that valley of death from a technology perspective, and make sure we're smartly investing. We're building a more rich and diverse and dynamic ecosystem. And let's face it, throughout history, It's the small businesses, it's the traditional and non-traditional innovation that occurs and that powers the big disruptive changes in the revolutionary or the revolution in military affairs, the RMAs that have been so disruptive. We've seen that in stealth. We've seen that in mobility in the past. I think data and AI are driving an incredible explosion of innovation, and the rate and pace of such is something like we've never seen. So it's absolutely important that we harness that. And of course, we know that academia and industry are the nexus of that. And so the more we can talk, the more we can collaborate, the more we can drive successful outcomes here. And so that is where we're going and how we're doing it. It's not a fad. It is absolutely the only way that's going to work going forward in the future. And as we look at that, as we look at our space communications, whether it's narrowband or wideband, that's another area that we're identifying the various service and component requirements now, in the midterm and in the long term, and we're evolving smart architectures to approach that. But I think as we look at large language models and generative AI, when we look at reinforcement learning, when we look at the capabilities for big data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning, this is bold new territory that is evolving. And when we look at the space environment, which is so big, so broad in terms of an area of responsibility, so rich in terms of volumes of data, and so important to share that. It must be underpinned by a paradigm of zero trust and identity and credential and access management, or ICAM. So we like to say there's no space heroes without cyber ones and zeros. That's absolutely true. We know that the ground, user, launch, and space segment are all tied by cyber. So cyber, data, AI, machine-to-machine speed are the key to making combined JADC2 work, viable, and frankly, one or two steps ahead of any competitor or peer out there in order to assure our successful outcomes.
Well, it really has been an interesting period of innovation over the last few years, and it's been exciting to see services transform themselves to be able to acquire more rapidly and keep pace with that rapid rate of change. Kind of pulling on that thread a little bit further, obviously you talked through the proliferated LEO architecture, large language models, data management, right? Quite a few disruptions over the last few years. If you look at the next 5 years out, what are some of the most important things that you see just over the horizon?
Well, like I said before, I think the next 5 years are going to be more disruptive, more changing, more fast-paced than the past 50. I think this is absolutely going to be the case. When we look at it, it's a veritable explosion of technology and its applications in almost every sector. But I think, and I've said it before, the nation that leads in data and AI will lead the world. And I think that is an absolute imperative for us in a data-centric, data-driven ecosystem where our systems of systems must be dependent upon that. It is really to drive one thing, and that's decision advantage or information advantage. And so that is going to be crucial. We're going to need to modernize not just our systems, but our people, our training, and our organizations and our cultures to be able to harness that potential. Additionally, I'm very excited about the capabilities, the proliferation of space capabilities, not just in launch, in space servicing and assembly and manufacturing, or ISAM, is going to have disruptive growth and truly expansive capabilities. We've not just begun to scratch the surface of the potential there. I do believe that, as we talk about that economic health and national security, that's going to open up an incredible ecosystem and economic engine of benefit. And along with that always goes the need to protect and deter and defend those elements. But I think other elements that are rapidly evolving include all our computational capabilities as we look at quantum computing and quantum algorithms and quantum resistant algorithms. So the offense and defense side of this, the cryptological aspects of those, I think that's going to be transformative and vitally important. I think material science is explosively growing, and I have a deep knowledge and affinity in that arena, and I think every day I'm amazed. When I got my master's in material science and engineering back in the early 90s, it was cutting edge then, and it's gone unbelievable leaps and bounds forward now. Huge enabler. Energy.
Really appreciate your time and you joining us here today to talk about the future of CJAD, C2, and partnering to win. It's been fantastic. I think we're just about out of time. Appreciate you joining us on America's Future Series, and we'll hand it back over.